So let's begin with the public meeting then. Sorry, did you just say we do the public meeting, right?
Yes, so that's first, and then we call the meeting to order.
Okay, so let's move into the public meeting. Administrative Policies will host a public meeting from 6 on to consider tax write-offs pursuant to Section 357 and 358 of the Municipal Act.
And I will remind the two attendees we have currently from the public that if they wish to speak at this public meeting, they have to raise their virtual hand in Zoom, which is located at the bottom middle of the screen. And I don't see any hands, Mr. Chair, so I believe we are good.
Okay, so shall we move on to the regular meeting then?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I would like to call this meeting to order then. And the first thing on the agenda, third thing on the agenda would be the approval of the agenda. May I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Chappelle moving and Councillor Holland seconding. Confirmation of the minutes, that the minutes of the Administrative Policies meeting number 02-2022 held Thursday, March 10th, 2022 be approved. May I have a mover, please? Councillor Doherty and seconded by Councillor Chappelle. All in favor? And actually all in favor for that first one too, which we just moved and seconded, please. Thank you. So it's a double all in favor. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest, please? Councillor Doherty.
Okay, hold on a second. I wrote it down. So I, Bridget Doherty of the Council of the City of Kingston, declare a conflict of interest on the report AP-22-014 tax write-offs pursuant to the Municipal Act 2001 because I own a property on it.
Thank you. And for all concerned, I would ask the clerk to confirm that for quorum purposes, a councillor that has declared a conflict does not destroy quorum. Is that correct?
I believe so. Let me just double check with, yes, it is. Sorry.
Thank you. So we will continue to have quorum despite the fact that Councillor Doherty will recuse herself from that portion of the meeting. Continuing on, I understand there are delegations. Who may I ask is the first delegation?
The first delegation on the agenda tonight is Cynthia Johnson.
Cynthia Johnson, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes and I'll give you a 30-second warning if you get close to the 5-minute mark. Go ahead.
Okay, there we are. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'm speaking tonight for the Kingston Home Share Hosts Working Group. We want to talk a little bit about what we're going to do later on in the agenda related to the one-year report on the bylaw. So I am Cynthia Johnson. I am a home share host. I have been legacy home share host for 5 years in Kingston. So that just sort of sets the stage for you. I want to start to say that the reason we want to make the delegation tonight and the reason we want to talk to you is because we talked quite a lot 2 years ago when the bylaw was coming, and we felt it was really important to come back now because we're in a very different mood. We're mostly happy, and we mostly want to tell you why we're so happy and then make a little bit of a comment about things that you're going to speak about later tonight and just share with you our thinking about that. So thank you to the Administrative Committee for letting me talk to you tonight. Thank you to Mayor Patterson and Councillor Roosterhoff for supporting us and really encouraging us to come forward and be part of the new world, the new start for short-term rentals that we're trying to do. Elaine Johns is also a home share host who helps our little working group, and I want to thank her very much as well. I want to thank city staff because they have worked with us. They have encouraged us. They have listened to us, and for the most part, what you're going to see tonight is reflecting what we have asked them about and help them learn about. So that's really good. And we also want to thank Tourism Kingston because they have taken the leadership and proactive in bringing in some of the licensed STRs to learn about the new MAP process, to learn about Tourism Kingston and CAP and see how they can become more progressively and I think rigorously involved in that process. So we wanted to make sure everyone understood that we were very happy about that. We also want to thank for thank everybody for the new supportive start. We have, that's what we're calling it. We really think that times are moving forward quite positively right now for short-term rentals and home share rentals generally in Kingston, and we're happy to have that happen. We're pleased to be back here at this committee talking about what we're going to do for the next year, now that the first year is coming to an end. And we have some very significant, I think, recommendations about that, but still we want to make sure that that, it's Bravo time. We are very happy with the way things are going. The data presented in the report that you're going to look at is not quite as full of activity as everyone kind of projected there was going to be in short-term rentals. But of course, we did have the pandemic and we did have Hamari. And so there were a few things that pulled us back, and we're kind of hoping that 2022 and going forward will be better in that regard. We have some lessons learned and we want to share those with you. And I think the biggest lesson has been for our staff and for us, it's been a very challenging process of learning. We dug in pretty hard to try to make it better at the beginning, and yet everyone had to learn something. And I think everyone has learned something. The bylaw was, the way it was written was primarily cut and paste or copied from other municipalities who also were trying very hard to figure out what to do about this tsunami of problems the short-term rentals were supposed to be creating for everybody. We do think, though, that many of those municipalities have made some changes in the ways that they've approached it. And those were very, very different times. We're moving forward now, so we think it's a positive that, in fact, staff is recommending to you that some changes to the existing bylaw, which might open the door for a few more, which would be better for the city in the long run. So that's what we're going to talk to you about tonight. We did do a lot of talking to home share hosts. We did a survey, which I'm not going to talk to you in terms of numbers because it was low and it's not scientifically or statistically relevant, but we learned quite a little bit about that. We did learn that and we learned from the report to council in first of this year, as well as talking to staff talking to home share hosts, that there weren't as many applications as we had.
30 seconds.
Pardon me, 5 minutes already? So sorry, I want to talk to you about we do think there's two things that are a problem in the bylaw. One is the limit on people who can stay, limits of the number of people who can stay based on all types except semi-detached, and we think that's odd. Why semi-detached? It should be all separate houses, apartments, whatever they are. And we also think that the amendment to the bylaw to reduce the number per operator is a problem. It's very easily circumvented by somebody who wants to circumvent it, and does not approach the problem that we had at the beginning, which was supposed to be ghost hotels, which absolutely never materialized. And there was only one complaint of all the STRs in the whole year. So we think that there are probably better ways of doing it. We just need to pause this process a little bit and figure out what the better ways are. Seattle, Washington is doing a better job. They have,
maybe I can suggest that one of the councillors ask for what you'd like to say, what additional material you'd like to present. Are there any questions from the committee? Councillor Doherty.
I had a few questions when you were speaking, but I would like you to finish what you were going to share. Especially, you just mentioned Seattle, so I'd like to hear more about what they're doing right.
Well, and I don't pretend, thank you, Councillor Doherty, I don't pretend to be an expert on Seattle, but what we're seeing there, and I think Seattle's not unlike Kingston in terms of a very progressive, trying to do things right, medium-sized city. They have determined that in residential areas, one operator can have 2 short-term rentals. And in the downtown core, where they're trying to encourage more, they have actually been a little bit more flexible on the numbers. So it's possible to do more than one operator, one license, one unit. And we do in the before times, we did have operators who had several, and they were doing a very good job and had very high 5-star ratings. So we know that it's possible. We also, though, don't like the idea of large multi-unit corporate businesses running short-term rentals on every corner. That's going to be no good for us, and it's going to be no good for our neighborhood. So we don't like that either, but we do think it's possible to work through better choices. I think the other thing, though, that I'd really like to take the opportunity to make sure I talk to you about is what we learned from the hosts that we surveyed, because we did learn quite a lot. There was a rumor that went around for a while that we had all moved to long-term rentals. And I want to correct that. We certainly, in fact, the survey that we did showed very, very few went to long-term rentals. Some paused altogether, some left and are not going to do it again. Most went to medium term, which is 2 to 3 to 4 months. And I have done that as well. And there's a lot of demand for visiting military, visiting doctors, going to school, nurses, grad students. 3 to 4 months is, there's a big demand for that as well. So we're having no trouble there. We just like to go back to short-term rental once. And we heard that from everyone, that if we could go back, get the application process and the FAQ and everything more transparent and working clearer, and the wording and the intent of the bylaw much clearer, most of us would come back. And I don't know how many that is, but it's a number, and it's not the number that you're seeing now. But we did learn that some of the people who did apply felt that the original application process and review and timelines were, they were onerous, they were invasive, overreach. Everybody was learning what exactly you could ask people when you applied for something, and it was way more than the goals of the bylaw. And for us, the goal of the bylaw, there was always 3 parts to that. That was defining and registering STRs. So to get MAT, that was the main purpose. And none of us ever said we didn't want MAT. We all said we'd voluntarily pay it. And apparently there wasn't a lot of faith that we would do that. But we think now that the city has bringing it in-house, there is more faith that we would pay that MAT. We wanted the goal was to develop a mechanism to help that ghost hotel, the threat of all the things that could go wrong, and make sure there was a system for that. We also said we were quite willing to register and be part of that self-regulation model. And with the new processes that staff has talking about, that's working better. They have worked with us on rewording the application, coming up with better questions, making sure that the internal processes inside the city staff are much straightforward and people know what they're supposed to be doing with it when it goes through the different departments. They're looking for a 10-day turnaround. That's pretty promising compared to what we were seeing before. And the final thing was we thought the goal was to encourage us so that we could continue to rent some of our surplus space in our houses to make a little income and meet some of the accommodation needs, and make Kingston a little bit of a destination on the map for home sharing. And I think we can do that as well. And just to reiterate, the 2 concerns we have mostly that we want to see people discussing a little bit more is it says a maximum of 4 people staying in anything except a semi-detached. But townhouses, townhouses, apartments, all those are also, if they have 3 or 4 bedrooms, they could also hold a family of 5. So 4 maximum is a little bit ridiculous for those. And we don't think the 1 operator, 1 unit is going to fly, because too many will just, I will get my husband and I will get my brother and I will get everyone to get an apartment. And, what have you gained by doing that? The administrative nightmare, keeping track of it all, is still there. So there are other ways that we can work around that.
Thank you.
That's all. Thank you.
Councillor Chappelle.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Councillor Chappelle, go ahead.
I thought I had clicked off the mute, so I apologize, Mr. Chair. So my question, I have a couple of questions. The first is, of the members that you're engaged with, are you currently on the working group that was put together by Tourism Kingston?
I am not, because I have not applied for a license, but 4 people on my working group are.
Okay. Of those 4 people on your working group and the other people you've engaged with, how many of them are listed on like, is it Airbnb, or are they on multiple platforms, or is it solely on Airbnb?
I don't entirely know the answer to that question, but my instinct is it's primarily Airbnb. Verbo, VRBO, I think that's how you say it, is some people also double book on that, but it's not as good and it doesn't provide the administrative bookkeeping kind of stuff. So it's really just extra. Most are Airbnb.
Okay.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee? Welcome, Councillor Roosterhoff. Seeing none, we'll move on to the, thank you, Ms. Johnston, and we'll move on to the second delegation, please.
Thank you.
The second delegation, Mr. Chair, is Mr. Kurt Khan.
Mr. Kurt Khan, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Councillor McLaren, and good evening, everyone. My name is Kurt. I'd just like to say a good evening to Councillor Holland, Councillor Doherty, Chappelle, and Councillor Roosterhoff, as well as my comrade in arms, Cynthia, for her presentation. And thank you so much for this opportunity to once again contribute to something that I hope will make Kingston a better place to live. Just as a bit of a background on myself, I've been an STR host since 2017. I own a property in the downtown BIA, and it is, I think, quite a successful business. The feedback and the just the experience that I've had has been wonderful. And that's why I feel kind of committed to helping iron out some of the issues that we're facing right now. And believe me, I honestly believe that these issues are real and we need to address them in a kind of nuanced, balanced, and sensitive way. Like the bylaw is a good thing. It is going to help us. And we all feel this way in the STR community, that there are potential pitfalls with this thing if left unregulated, and it needs to be. None of us wants to see Kingston turned into what we hear in Montreal or Ottawa or Toronto. We love this city very much and would hate for anything to degenerate it. And along those lines, I can help contribute a little bit to maybe some of the questions that the councillors may have, because I have been involved in some of the working groups right from the beginning. And I would just like to acknowledge right away this willingness for the city to engage with us has been really well received. We very much appreciate you taking the time to consult with us, set up times. I have to acknowledge Megan Knott and the Tourism Kingston group for being so wonderful and inclusive with us. We've had many presentations from, I think, Jeff Walker, Lisa Carpenter, I'm sorry, many other kind of stakeholders within the group, CAP as well. And we just like to say we very much appreciate that. Within the bylaw itself, I think most of us would say that it's good for the most part. The iteration now that's before us, the biggest problem that we have as an STR host is, for me anyway, I think Cynthia outlined a few other things in terms of definitional things, is the one person, one license. And this is something I was hoping that I could maybe ask that we have a greater discussion around. One of the things that I think that was very amazing was this willingness of the working group to present us with challenges that they were having, and then solicit our information and present it to them and come up with different solutions. For some reason with this particular issue, that never happened. I felt quite blindsided by it, and I was surprised because up until this point, it hadn't been that way. There was never, as I saw it, a table that this was an issue, that maybe that there was some problems with the number of licenses or the number of listings or units per license. It was always our understanding that this was kind of an open thing and that it was not restricted in any way. So when it came up to one license, one operator, that kind of thing, it was quite a shock to us all. So we're all kind of reeling a little bit, and this all kind of came up really closely. And there is, like I mentioned before, a danger of just allowing this thing to be completely open-ended. But there's also a benefit to allowing multiple operators, especially I feel, and I hate to be kind of self-promoting, I never expected to love this job. And for me, this is what I hope you'll recognize. Sometimes the language in some of the communications I see is like, it's a thing to earn a little extra bit of money, or, to help people make ends meet. I've taken this on as a career, and I really feel a sense of commitment, not only to the guests, but also to Kingston. And I actually quite love it. It's something that I would love to do and keep on doing. But in order for me to make this, a living to support my family and myself, one unit isn't really going to cut it. And I don't know that to kind of blanket the entire situation with, you know, the entire problem with this one solution of just limiting it is the best way to handle this issue. Like Cynthia mentioned, that Seattle has come up with a more nuanced kind of approach where they are looking at different neighborhoods, because some of the challenges that we have are how many actual STRs go into a certain neighborhood. I personally live in the Inner Harbor. It is thank you. It's a lovely, vibrant, thriving neighborhood, and I would hate for it to be degenerated or made more, you know, like less personal. So to be able to, this bylaw particularly doesn't actually address the fact that there might be needing to be a limit per neighborhood, or in the Seattle model that recognize that the downtown core might have a benefit of increasing the amount of STRs in that area. So what I would just like to end with is that there is the need to look at this further. This particular issue should be, I think, more hashed out a little bit more, and actually given the STRs a chance to contribute, which we haven't been given up until this point. So I appreciate your time. Thank you. I hope I didn't go over too much or bore you too much, but I appreciate everything.
Thank you, Mr. Khan. Are there any questions from the committee? Councillor Chappelle.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Khan, I'm very interested in how you've shared your passion for this new role that you've created and opportunity you created. In your mind, how many STRs would be a suitable amount for you to support your family moving forward if you were to have more than one?
Thank you very much, Councillor Chappelle, for that question. It's a question that I think is important. For me, you know, I'm a very simple person. I've had a career that is laden with money as well as the problems that it brings with it. I've decided to live a life that's quite, you know, basic and simple. And for someone like me, 2 to 3 STRs would be more than I could actually handle as a job. It's a very like full-time and involved thing. Like, you're always communicating with people, you're always running schedules, you're always cleaning. I clean and manage the places all myself. My place, I only have the one at this point myself. And to do it to a standard that's quite high takes quite a lot of time, like almost 4 hours, 3 to 4 hours every day. So it would be almost impossible for a single operator to run more than that without losing any kind of, you know, quality, in my opinion. So for me, a room out of my primary residence and 2 others that would be, you know, in a neighborhood that is capable of supporting them, not degenerating it, you know, like these kind of things, I think I'm very sensitive to. In terms of looking for another investment property, I would be very cognizant of where the property is, what types of guests are staying there, how the neighborhood is constructed, if there's anything else in that area that would be in conflict with that. And that would be something that I would be very cognizant of, to make sure that, you know, it's kind of symbiotic with. So if, to answer your question, a room in my primary residence or my basement plus 2 other STRs could keep me in a full-time job very well, I think.
Supplemental to that, then, the sense that I get is they're trying to avoid the commercialization or the larger company coming in and buying a suite of properties and turning them into that type of business. And maybe for a way to save that, I'm just asking your opinion on this, would be that you would have, if you were to be in the STR rental business, you should have a property and be a resident of Kingston, one, and would that help address that issue? Because I think nobody really wants to see someone buy an apartment block and turn it into all STRs, for example.
Absolutely. I would hope that that would be something that we could verify. My only, you know, I've got a bit of a criminal mind, I guess, and I see people buying these things and just having an address and not actually living here. I 100%, 1000% agree that we should live here. Anybody who runs a business of this nature should be involved in the city and see its impact, as well as it promote it. You know, like, part of the job that I have is actually helping these people enjoy Kingston, understand it, know where to go and what to see, all the best hiking trails and restaurants. And, it's a major part of my contribution to their time here. Somebody who doesn't live here, I can see this just being a hotel. And yeah, so having somebody live here and being part of the community, I think would be essential to doing it properly.
Mr. Chair, am I limited to 2 questions? Because the only question I want to
You
know
are,
is-
but the first one was very short, so I'll give you leave to do another question.
I appreciate that, sir. And my question to you, Mr. Khan, is: are you on multiple platforms, or do you simply utilize Airbnb?
Yeah, it's another good question. I'm only on Airbnb. That's all. It's almost like, it's the only game in town, really. You do, like with my particular unit, I guess I'm lucky enough that we have a a history of pretty good service. I don't have any need to go outside of Airbnb in order to keep my place fully booked. So I really haven't seen the opportunity or the desire to do anything like that. I've never used VRBO. From what I understand by that one, it's more of a cottagey, non-city type of rental. It's more for people that are looking to rent a vacation property for a week or 2 weeks or something like that with their families out in the township. Downtown, the only other one that I heard of was booking.com, but it just doesn't, it's not as polished as Airbnb. It doesn't have the assurance. Like, as a host, one of the challenges that we have is that our properties are, we're kind of taking a huge risk with letting these people stay with us. The Airbnb platform has this review system that is really well developed. It really is. I don't know if anybody's like, I'll refuse people who don't have good reviews, or if they don't have any reviews, in all honesty, because if the conversation or the communication with me is somewhat sketchy, and they don't have good reviews, I simply won't accept them. So Airbnb is really kind of got it down. You would be, I think, silly to not use it as your primary booking platform.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Are there any questions? Councillor Doherty, please.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair. So I was early on very much of a supporter for a bylaw to restrict it, because I traveled in Europe, and there was even some graffiti like Airbnb go home, like it was just destroying some neighborhoods. So restricting it, I'm glad to hear that you agree and understand the reason for the city to take some control and responsibility in all of this. I would like to hear more about 2 things. One is a bit more about what Seattle has done that works well. It was interesting how you were saying it's in different areas, but it sounds like in some areas people could own more than one, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Also, it sounds like the whole committee, it's been a really positive experience. And then you said at the very end, the limit of 1 was just introduced in the final document. Is that what you were saying, or was that not discussed at all?
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. It actually came up in a really, roundabout way. We weren't even talking about this particular limit, and I think it was Mr. Campo had started chatting about it, and he presented it to me. And I at first I thought I wasn't hearing right, because, like I was saying earlier, other issues were presented to us, especially around the procedural things about how to apply for a license and how we could make the process smoother and more amenable to other people. And our comments and our feedback, I think, were really well heard and incorporated into the process. This was never presented to us. It was never shown as an issue. And it's always kind of been known in the background that, excuse me, Toronto and Ottawa and Montreal had problems. But Kingston isn't those places, absolutely not. And, we have to address Kingston as a unique city with its own unique challenges. So I had never heard of people wanting to operate. And I read the staff report saying that there was somebody who wanted to run 43 in one building. That was a huge surprise to me. I'd never heard this. And, there are ways to address this. So I think the Seattle model, just to kind of get into your other question, Councillor Doherty. The only way I know about it is I just read an article, really. You know, I did a search for it. Once I saw this, I'm like, oh my God, what are other communities doing? Is there a better approach to just, you know, having this hard and fast limit? And they did. They had a very interesting, first of all, they had a grandfather clause. People that were already in it, running it, and had kind of proven their commitment were given this third unit. So what they were saying is that in most of the city, that 2 units could be operated by, or 2 listings could be operated by one person. If you had already been doing it prior to the implementation, you were allowed a third one. And I think that third one was restricted or limited to your own property. So you could have yours in your own principal residence, like a room or something, plus 2 others. And again, the idea was to allow an actual viable income to be created or generated by these things. By these restrictions. The other thing that I thought was interesting was it kind of took into account the different neighborhoods in the city and what was most popular and what had the room to absorb maybe more STRs and maybe what didn't. And, you know, that seems like a big challenge, but I think it's something that we should take on. And I'm not sure how the logistics or how the, you know, the kind of the analysis of that would go, where you would say, take all our districts, like everybody, like your own district, and then you would have some sort of database about how many are in that district. And do we limit the number that stay in that district? That's how it appeared that the Seattle model was working, is that they were monitoring and assessing and reassessing these numbers over and over. I hope that helps. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, that was good information. Thanks.
Yeah, and I also do feel the same way as you, you know, like seeing these Airbnb go homes, like I kind of feel it's a weird dichotomy that exists within me, because I don't want to see what Airbnb is capable of doing happen here. But at the same time, I see that if it's managed and restricted and maybe, you know, delivered in the proper way in Kingston, it can be a really positive thing for people like me and all the people that I've ever dealt with. The level of, like, I don't know, commitment to the guest is stunning. I didn't expect it to be such a high, because, you know, this review system is something. It has this tendency to create in you the want to be better and do more and have really great reviews. So the place is spotless. You try to offer more amenities. You try to be more helpful and more engaged and more communicative. So there's something about the platform that does generate in certain people, you know, a desire to be really good at this.
Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Khan.
Thank you, Councillor.
Moving on to item 8, business Rideau Crest Board of Management. So I'm going to ask for a motion that the Administrative Policies Committee resolve itself into the Board of Management for Rideau Crest Homes. Moved by Councillor Chappell, seconded by Councillor Holland. We are now directors. And I believe there's a report to be presented. Oh, I'm sorry. There's a briefing first. My apologies. Let's undo that and go back to number 7 for briefings. Mr. Campo, I understand you're going to have a briefing for us. You have the floor now. Yes, Mr. Clerk.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. It's the briefing will actually occur right before item 8D. So we can just jump right to the Rideau Crest Board of Management.
Okay, then forget the last few seconds. We are back in as the Board of the Rideau Crest Management. So can we have the, do we have a presentation for that? No? Okay, does anybody have any questions on the report?
It appears, sorry, Mr. Chair, that Casey Key's audio is not working. I think she would like to introduce the report, but because I think I saw her speaking, but we can't hear you, unfortunately, Ms. Keys.
I'm sorry, I'm still not hearing anything.
Through you, Mr. Chair, Ms. Keys may have to leave the meeting and come back, or someone else can deliver her thing for her.
Mr. Chair, if I may, can you
Yes,
hear me?
please.
Hi,
ahead.
sorry, I was just eating my dinner. I'm sorry about that. I am here as well. If there are any questions, we don't have a formal presentation on the Board of Management report, but happy to take any questions from the committee, and I will do my best to manage those while Ms. Keys tries to get back onto the call, if that's helpful.
Thank you. That would be wonderful. I believe I saw Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excuse me. I just had a question about, and I can ask Ms. Keys another time if this is too specific to the operations, but there was mention in the report about number of hours. Oh, she's coming back. I'll just hold off. Okay.
Hey, Ms. Keys, welcome back. And we still don't hear you.
Councillor Holland, go ahead and ask the question, and I can take a stab at it.
Sure. I was just wondering about the number of hours available for registered or allied health professionals. That one of the changes that's coming up with the new legislation, and it looks like a certain number of hours are available. I don't have the number in the report right in front of me, but it's like 36 hours a month or something for allied health professional care that it's in tandem with the enhanced care services and long-term care as part of the legislation. And I was just curious about whether that those hours were, on a kind of a basis, or whether there's an ongoing schedule of allied healthcare professionals who are circulating in the home.
Sorry, if you can just give me a quick second, I can type to Casey because I actually don't know that detailed of a question. Just give me a moment and I'll be right back with the committee with apologies. So I'm just going to read to you what she said, Councillor Holland. She said there's an ongoing schedule of hiring of allied health professionals for the 4-year implementation, along with the direct care staff. So I think, if I'm saying this correctly, we did provide a multi-year plan as part of the budget. It's showing us how we're getting up to that 4 hours of care by the 2025. So it's being done on an incremental basis over the 4 years, with a number of positions being added in both areas, like incrementally over the next couple of years to get to that 4-hour care standard that we have to meet. Is that helpful?
Yeah, I guess that's really what I was looking for, was to figure out the hands-on care hours, if they consisted of just PSW, I shouldn't say just PSW, but like, does that include recreational services or occupational or physiotherapy services? And it sounds like that's what it is. So that's great.
Yeah, I believe it covers all of that in terms of resident care.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Doherty, Director Doherty, go ahead.
Thank you, and through you. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions about the wait list. The fact that we have like over 500 people waiting to get in there and 42 people in crisis. And what does in crisis mean, and where are they? And just showing in there if the fixing the long-term act include an expansion of the or more beds in our community.
Thank you, and through you. So the in-crisis care, Councillor Doherty, is really referencing individuals that are requiring, I think, a high level of care, like within their home on a regular basis, either by like a care professional or a family member, and it's getting to a point where it's so much that they require high. So that's how we generally characterize the crisis. There is a plan being put together for new beds and new licenses for beds being released throughout the province. And I believe at council we did have a motion that was asking us to explore the possibility of looking at an additional long-term care home within the municipality. And Casey and I have been working on that jointly with CAO Hurdle as well. So we'll be providing some additional information on that. And basically when the licenses become available, I believe the operators put in different bid proposals trying to seek those beds within their communities. And then there's a decision provincially about how they're allocated.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, then since this report is for information only, I will ask for a motion that the Administrative Policies Committee arise from the Board of Management of Perdido Crest. Anyone? Councillor Doherty moves and somebody seconds. Thank you, Councillor Roosterhoff. All in favor? We're back to being councillors. Thank you. And Part B, audited financial services for the year ending December 31st, 2021. Report of the Chief Financial Officer and City Treasurer is attached. Are there any questions for our City Treasurer? Seeing none, I think you got off very easy today. So there's a recommendation that the Administrative Policies Committee receive the audited financial statements and other financial information of the Corporation of the City of Kingston, year ending December 31st, 2021, attached as Exhibit A to report number AP 22-015 and KPMG's 2021 audit findings report for the Corporation of the City of Kingston for the year ending December 31st, 2021, attached as Exhibit B to report number AP-22-015 and recommend as follows: that Council receive and approve the audited financial statements and other financial information of the Corporation of the City of Kingston, year ending December 31st, 2021, attached as Exhibit A to report AP-22-015. May I have a mover? Okay, Councillor Osterhoff and Councillor Doherty seconding. All in favor?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
sorry if I could just interrupt. I just wanted to let the committee know we do have Lori Huber and Caitlin Cox here with us from KPMG, and attached to the report and the financial statements is their audit findings report. Perhaps if we could just provide them an opportunity just to quickly run through the audit findings report. They do have a couple things they would like to just discuss with the committee.
Yes, please. Give us a brief report and let us know of any points of improvement that we should be taking into consideration, please. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pleased to be here tonight to give you a very high-level overview of the summary of our 2021 audit. The detailed report, be it our audit findings report, was pre-circulated to the group, so we will go through this very, very quickly, Caitlin and myself, and certainly welcome any questions from the group. So in terms of audit highlights, this sort of covers off all of the items that we should share with yourselves, being those charged with governance relative to the financial statements and the financial reporting process. We are essentially complete. A lot of hard work went into the financial statement preparation on the part of management this year, along with our own from the external audit side of the house. And certainly, if you've had the opportunity to read through a report, there are certainly no significant findings to report. The audit window will continue to stay open until Council does accept and approve the financial statements for the 2021 year. So to the extent anything significant happens in this intervening period, we'll certainly be alerted and keep the conversations with management to the extent they might implicate either our audit report or the financial statements themselves. So our contribution to the annual financial statements is our draft audit report. It is included in our report and it is a clean audit report. So in our opinion, we believe the financial statements do present fairly in all material respects the financial activities of the City of Kingston for the 2021 year ended. In terms of audit findings, One of the things that we like to do as part of our completion is to circle back on our audit plan. And for some of you, it might feel like it was a while ago, and it certainly was, certainly over 6 months ago. We had come to you with our annual audit plan in terms of the preparation of what we had planned to look at. What we've given you this year is certainly a summary of our audit plan, and I'm pleased to be here tonight to say that we have completed our audit in accordance with our plan, and there were certainly no significant deviations to bring to your attention. And with that, I'll pass it over to Caitlin to talk very, very quickly in terms of some of the highlights that were a focus area of our audit this year.
Perfect. Thank you, Lori. I'm just going to do a quick summary of some of the key procedures we performed as highlighted in our audit plan. And I'll start with the areas of audit focus highlighted beginning on page 4 of our report. One of the key areas we look at each year is government grants to ensure any external restrictions have been met for those grants that were recognized as revenue, as well as verify any receivables, payables, or deferrals. We complete this procedure by looking at the funding agreements and testing the underlying expenditures that were incurred under those agreements, and we do not have any findings from this procedure. The second area of audit focus we've highlighted relates to tangible capital assets, where we perform testing over the significant additions in the year, including those that are in work in progress, as well as any assets that were transferred out of work in progress and into in service in the year. So from these findings, I'm also happy to report we do not have any findings. The final area of audit focus that we've highlighted relates to expenses, including payroll expenditures. So we have evaluated the design and implementation and effectiveness of internal controls surrounding payroll and performed a substantive analytical procedure over the expenditures, as well as verified any year-end accruals. We also performed substantive tests over operating expenditures by looking at the underlying invoices, as well as a review of payments subsequent to year-end to ensure the completeness of accruals was achieved at year-end. Another great news story is that we do not have any findings from these procedures. The next section of our report highlights the critical accounting estimates that are included in the consolidated financial statements. These items do involve an element of judgment, and as a result, we do perform enhanced procedures surrounding their appropriateness. The first two we've highlighted here relate to employee future benefit obligations and landfill closure and post-closure liabilities. The employee future benefit obligations is determined using a third-party actuary, while the landfill closure is determined internally using an internal expert. We do assess the competence and objectivity of the experts used in these calculations, as well as perform procedures to assess the reasonableness of the data and assumptions that were used in building those estimates. We also cross-compare to other municipalities for reasonableness, and I'm happy to report we didn't have any findings from these procedures. The final critical accounting estimate relates to accrued compensation. And we do review all significant payroll accruals at year-end and agree amounts to supporting documentation, as well as hold discussions and perform procedures to ensure the completeness of those accruals is achieved as well. As Lori mentioned, as we progress to the audit, we do use a materiality threshold in the performance of our procedures. Our materiality this year, as a reminder, was 10 million, which translates into an audit misstatement posting threshold of $500,000, which is the threshold at which we would compile and communicate any findings back to the committee. I'm happy to report that this page is fairly clean because we do not have any audit misstatements that were identified in the current year. In our role of external auditor, we're also responsible for communicating any significant deficiencies in internal controls we identify throughout our audit procedures. That may warrant the attention of the committee. And I'm happy to report that we did not identify any significant deficiencies in internal controls in the current year. The next two pages highlight the financial statement presentation and disclosure. We're happy to report that we're comfortable with the financial statements as presented in front of you today. We have highlighted on page 12 of our report one key accounting standard that is upcoming in fiscal 2023. There has been lots of chatter regarding it, and it relates to asset retirement obligations. It is expected to have a fairly significant impact on the financial reporting for the city. So we have included some additional information in Appendix 4 related to this upcoming standard for your reference. The final page we have highlights the additional audit work we have completed to support the consolidated opinion of the city, as well as the additional engagements, as well as upcoming engagements we will be completing in the near future. I'll hand things back to Lori to conclude our presentation.
Thanks very much, Caitlin. The balance of our report, as you would see, there are a number of appendices, which are really for your information, either relative to certain mandatory communications with management and or resources in terms of your role on this committee or perhaps other things that you do. So with that, I will pause here and welcome any questions from the group.
Councillor Chappelle.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if this question was really for you. The meeting sort of progressed quite quickly. But one of the risks that I see is using an inflation rate of 2% per annum, and yet it's not highlighted in the document that using 2% is probably a substantial underestimation for costs with regards to employee future benefits and obligations as such, because the inflation rate certainly is not 2%.
So perhaps through you, Mr. Chair, I will take a first response to that question, and maybe perhaps I'll also ask Ms. Kennedy if she would like to respond as well. So one of the significant inputs into the employee future benefit calculations includes that assumption. It is valued in full every 3 years. This was an in-between year, and certainly in light of the changed market conditions, that will be something that will be reflected in the current year valuation and likely have an impact on the liability. But certainly for this fiscal year that was considered, we have had those discussions with the team and are likely to expect that change to be incorporated on a prospective basis in the current fiscal.
So inflation was certainly running a lot sooner, like I would say probably most of this year. And it's only been increasing by month. So you're satisfied that 2% is a suitable number for this assessment of risk?
At this point in time, yes. Through you, Mr. Chair, and perhaps Ms. Kennedy, if you wanted to expand.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, just to add to Ms. Huber's comments. So yes, this is a 3-year initiative, and so next year there will be a complete update. So there are estimates involved, though the company that actually does this for us does look annually at whether there's anything significant that needs to be changed. But the other piece that I will add on is part of their calculations is they do actually incorporate higher than 2% in terms of the cost, the future costs that they're including. So the note 9 in the financial statements provides the escalation that they use for the health and dental benefits, which are somewhere around between 4 to 6%, somewhere in there that they're actually using. So they are actually building in higher costs. But to your question, Councillor, I think probably with what we have been seeing this last year in terms of inflation, when this comes back up again for renewal, those 4 to 6% will probably be something higher than that.
Okay, I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. And through you, yeah, it went a bit quickly for me too, so I'm not sure to whom I'm asking this question, but it was on page 43 of our report under long-term liabilities. It, just gonna look at it quickly now, under tax sources, it goes from like in all the years until 2026, it's 10,000 something, and then all of a sudden in 2027, it jumps up to 137 plus thousand. And I just wonder what would explain that huge jump. And the same thing with utilities, user fees, and all of the numbers in 2027 seem to be much higher.
Thank you, Councillor Doherty. Through you, Mr. Chair. So I think you're referring to the numbers in note 10B, which is the principal repayments that are being projected for the long-term liabilities. And so the way that the note is structured, it provides the annual principal repayment for the years 2022 through to 2026. That next column, which has the significantly larger numbers, is actually the principal repayments for 2027 and future years. So we only provide the annual for the first 5 years, and then that last column is the remaining principal repayment for the remainder of the debt.
That makes sense. It was phew.
Okay, Councillor Chappelle, you did only ask one question. I'm going to allow a second one.
You're very gracious tonight, Mr. Chair. I appreciate your support and assistance in that. We recently had a motion through council, and I'm not sure would catch in this budget, but how will the long-term loan for Kingston Frontenac Housing Corporation be accounted for in the budget going forward? Where would I find that next year's budget? Will it be identified as a long-term loan to a third party?
Thank you through you, Mr. Chair. So thanks for that question, Councillor Chappell, because that is one area that's a little bit different in the financial statements this year. So note 22 in the financial statements, which I think is on page 37 of the statements, looks like page 53 of the agenda package, outlines some of the detail with respect to that note. There really is, within these consolidated statements, there is no impact because the three entities that are involved, so the Kingston Municipal Nonprofit Housing, the Kingston Frontenac Housing Corporation, and the City of Kingston, their operations are all consolidated within these financial statements, and were prior to this transaction happening. So there's no difference in terms of the reporting, but that's a great question in terms of that annual note. So right now, that promissory note is owed by the Kingston Frontenac Housing Corporation to the Kingston Municipal Nonprofit Housing Corporation. At some point in time this year, and I believe based on some emails I just saw this week with the lawyers, it's going to happen fairly soon, that Kingston Municipal Nonprofit Housing Corporation will wind up and that note will be transferred to the city. The plan is then going forward, we have a promissory side agreement that council had approved quite a while ago with respect to that note, that as that principal payment becomes due each year, rather than having a cash payment come from Kingston Frontenac Housing to the city would basically write that down and it would become a contributed capital. So it would be an equity that the city would own of Kingston Frontenac Housing. But more importantly, within that agreement, what we have incorporated, rather than doing this over and I can't remember what the term was, I think it was like 15 years, rather than doing that over 15 years, we have the opportunity to just do it all at once. So we would basically write off that promissory note. So there would be no cash flow coming to the city, but in lieu of that, then the city would hold that as contributed capital within Kingston Frontenac Housing. And because the city owns 100% of the shares of Kingston Frontenac Housing, there's no risk there. So if something happened with that entity and it dissolved down the road, then that equity then becomes part of the city. And so it's really just a paper flow in terms of how we manage that through a contributed capital.
Yeah, I think the term was 50 years though.
I believe the note itself is repayable over 15 annual installments is how that was set up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But the plan is that we will certainly look at whether there's any benefit to just doing that entry every year for 15 years, or whether it makes more sense from an efficiency standpoint just to do that entry all at once after the note's transferred over and just turn it into a contributed capital that would be sitting as an asset on the city statements.
My only concern with that approach would be that you lose track of where that money's gone and where it was earmarked or how you're contributing. So the annualized event allows for ongoing councils to have knowledge of what decision was made, because 5-10 years from now, we may not remember that we had that large transfer for convenience sake. And so if I was to offer some suggestion, I think the annualized process would be much more transparent to the public.
Thank you. I appreciate that input.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee? Great, thank you. I'm glad to hear there were no nefarious findings, no deficiencies. Everything was reasonable and clean. Were there any points of improvement that you could recommend to the committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are no items that need to be brought forward to the committee at this time based on the results of our audit.
Wonderful. We're happy to hear that. Thank you very much. So the recommendation is that the Administrative Policies Committee recommend to Council that Council approve the cancellation. Whoops, sorry. Are we doing the tax write-offs? No, we are doing audited financial statements. Okay, I read it. that council receive and approve the audited financial statements and other financial information of the corporation of the city of Kingston, year ending December 31st, 2021, as attached as Exhibit A and report AP 22-015. I believe we've moved it. Can we have a vote all in favor? Thank you. Moving on to Part C, tax write-offs pursuant to the Municipal Act of 2021. The report of the Chief Financial Officer is attached. Can I have a mover to put it on the floor? Councillor Chappell and a seconder. Councillor Roosterhoff. It is now on the floor. Ms. Kennedy, did you want to say anything to this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just briefly, this is the standard report that comes 2 or 3 times a year to the committee with some write-offs. There is a schedule attached, which is basically requesting approval to write off just over $200,000. Mainly the properties relate to either properties that are in renovation, or there's a write-off period for that, or there were, I believe, a couple of MPAC factual errors that that are being addressed. The 200,000, or the city's portion of that, is being absorbed within the 2022 expense line in our 2022 operating budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? Great, seeing none, we will move the recommendation that the Administrative Policies Committee recommend to Council that Council approve the cancellation, reduction, or refund of taxes pursuant to applications made under sections 357 and 358 of the Municipal Act 2021, totaling $219,225, of which $163,274.54 is the city's portion, and the amount charged back to the school boards is $55,950.46, as listed in Exhibit A attached to report AP 22-014. Can I call the question? All those in favor? And then passes unanimously. Thank you. A short-term rental bylaw review, year 1 review. I understand we have a presentation from Mr. Campeau. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, your chair, and through you. Wow, we're 1 year into short-term rentals, and this year has definitely gone by fast. We learned a substantial amount through this first year in terms of the licensing process, and an incredible amount of valuable input from the stakeholders in the community that went into this process in this 1 year review. Just as an overview, at Council's direction, staff are providing this committee, the Administrative Policies Committee, with an evaluation of the effectiveness of the STR bylaw 1 year after implementation. And that includes an in-house licensing process that incorporates the collection of municipal accommodation tax through a payment portal. Next slide, please. So throughout 2021 and 2022, staff worked with stakeholders on adjustments to the short-term rental licensing process, focusing on customer experience and feedback to develop a more streamlined and structured process. Delays were experienced with the licensing review process due to insufficient documentation provided by the applicant. That resulted in additional time spent by staff requesting information related to the applicant's floor plans specifically, and or the parking management plans. Challenges with the bylaw interpretation on number of units and applicants requiring building permits and or zoning approvals to legalize the suites. And staff recognized that changes to the application form and clarity on obtaining a license required a less strenuous process. Next slide, please. So for STR process improvements, in Q1 of 2022, a working group was established to work with stakeholders to ensure sales and marketing, MAT remittance, communication channels, and bylaw regulations aligned. Consultation and feedback from the community and operators was, again, incredibly valuable as staff worked through the first year and feedback was implemented regarding a variety of process improvements. Based on the public consultation, staff feedback, and stakeholder meetings, changes to the application process to improve efficiency and turnaround times were made as follows. Such as such, eliminated the requirement to submit drawings, and that's floor plans and plot plans, without reducing the life safety aspect. Refined the amount of information required on the initial application. Created a new license renewal form to shorten the renewal process. And implemented an FAQ guide for operators to provide guidance and clarity for consistency. Next slide, please. So a total of $14,940 has been received in license registration fees for short-term rentals to date. The estimated direct staff time spent on the licensing program was more than 1,600 hours. So that was about 2 months in total, from June 1st, 2021 through the end of May 2022, with the associated cost being around $90,000. In total, the licensing department received 128 short-term rental license applications, and we successfully issued 83 short-term rental licenses, and that's 51 in 2021 and 32 in 2022. The active listings on booking sites for Kingston at the time of this report was 214. Recognizing that this is a snapshot in time as listings fluctuate depending on the rental frequency. Of the 83 licenses issued, 5 operators have been issued 2 licensed rental properties each. Of the 24 licenses under review, 13 represent operators that are currently licensed. Next slide, please. So this is a snapshot based on electoral districts of where STRs are located within the municipality. So that's a quick snapshot, and I can get further into it on the next slide. Well, my apologies, we'll go to clarifying the bylaw, and we can go back to that snap if the committee would like. Due to the interpretations throughout the first year, challenges were posed to the licensing program, in which licenses were issued to operators for more than one property, as well as applicants submitted for multiple units within the same building. So because of these interpretations, staff are recommending an amendment to clarify the intent of the bylaw in respect to the number of short-term rentals permitted per operator. So the current bylaw in section 5.2 illustrates that every operator shall obtain a license and no more than 1 license per operator is permitted. So we had ambiguities that was presented to us in regards to that definition or that regulation, I should say. And the clarity that staff would like to recommend is that an operator shall not hold more than 1 license and shall not operate or permit the operation of more than 1 short-term rental at any time. Next slide, please. So the restriction on the number of licenses per operator was put in place to expand STRs outside of the principal residence and to allow greater flexibility for an operator to rent an alternate property that they own. The provisions were also intended to help limit negative impacts on the availability of long-term rental units while allowing the economic benefits and convenience of home sharing. Where licenses are considered for multiple dwelling units at the same property, implications of creating other uses such as boarding, lodging, and rooming houses or hotels/motels would require additional life safety upgrades under the Building Code Act and more restrictive zoning regulations for uses not considered short-term rentals. By clarifying the wording in the bylaw limits 1 short-term rental per license per operator, these challenges staff feel would be minimized. Next slide, please. So although not intended, section 5.2 of the bylaw as currently written permits more than 1 property/dwelling unit per license. And due to the city communicating and following this process with operators over the last year, staff are recommending that operators who received a license for multiple properties be allowed to continue to renew these licenses, and that no further licenses be issued to operators for multiple short-term rentals once the amendment is approved. Where a license issued under the bylaw is not renewed by the anniversary of the date on which the license was first issued, that license would be canceled. Only licenses under the current bylaw wording are entitled to renew going forward. Next slide, please. So enforcement. Enforcement throughout the first year of the bylaw has been based on voluntary compliance. I know that was strongly communicated in prior meetings, and that's how our enforcement strategy was implemented. Using a reactive strategy on a complaint basis with a moderate rate of compliance from the community based on the number of licenses issued in relation to the date available on booking sites. Only one complaint was received throughout the first year, and a notice of violation was issued with no charges that were laid. Staff will continue to encourage voluntary compliance and education prior to utilizing available enforcement tools that could lead to fine and/or charges for short-term rental operators as the process moves forward. Data on the booking sites has been cross-referenced with licensed operators by designated licensing agents to increase enforcement efforts and provide a proactive response for noise, garbage, parking, and life safety aspects. Staff received the approval from the Solicitor General for set fines Friday, June 3rd, after writing the report, which will provide additional enforcement avenues moving forward. Next slide, please. So the municipal accommodation tax remittance. So the total revenue collected for 2021 was $5,778.72. and $6,685.85 respectively for 21 operators in Q3 and 18 licensed operators in Q4. Of the total, $9,694.47 was remitted directly through the Himari payment portal, with the remaining operators reporting revenues through the Himari portal, however, making their payment through the city's payment center. As the number of licensed operators in short-term rental market increases, these revenues are expected to increase. Staff have explored and tested an in-house online reporting and remittance portal that will enable operators to file their MAT revenue information and remit payments electronically in a secure and efficient manner in which which will be available on the city's website and integrate with our current land management system to cross-reference license numbers and to ensure accuracy of this information. The reporting tool is targeted for the next remittance period, due date of July 31st, for operators to remit Q1 and Q2 of 2022. Operating training will commence once the portal is approved and available. Next slide, please. So the overview of, again, the first year implementation, although challenges were introduced for the first year, staff were able to refine the licensing framework to clarify and streamline the submission process in working with community stakeholders. Challenges have been minimized for both internal and external groups, allowing for more enhanced metrics and impact analysis moving forward with continued operator collaboration. With the integration of the online portal for MAT submissions, the licensing process will be further refined to allow for a seamless transition from application submission to issuance and payment processing. And clarifying one short-term rental per license per operator will eliminate approval challenges by other city services and reduce impacts on the community by protecting the existing long-term rental units and community and supporting tourism while allowing the economic benefits and convenience of home sharing. And further to that, I did absolutely want to commend the amount of stakeholder feedback that we got. We heard from Ms. Johnson, we heard from Mr. Khan today. The amount of information that we've received in collaboration with these groups has been tremendous. Not only as staff did we have our ups and downs throughout this process, it has been a strenuous process for a lot involved. And throughout this collaboration, it has been excellent to see the relationship that we've been having with the community to form the process and the recommendations that are in front of this committee tonight. So I am joined by my colleagues through various departments. We'd be happy to answer questions from this presentation.
Thank you. Since this is a briefing, questions only. We will be able to do comments or amendments after we put it on the floor. Are there any questions? Councillor Roosterhoff, go ahead.
Can you hear me now? I'm in a very unusual location here. Thank you for that, Kyle. Excellent. That was really well done and presented. And I too want to echo. I guess I've followed this for a year as well as a counselor, and I think council should be pleased by the amount of work that staff has done, and also. Mr. Chair, a revived relationship, I would say, between stakeholders. And I want to commend Tourism Kingston too, and CAP. Everybody's worked together well. So I'm hopeful that we'll be close tonight and be able to meet some of the things happening. Maybe I'll go to my question first, Mr. Chair, sorry. The question I had, Kyle, was related to the timelines for the portal. Did you say that? When would the MAT remittance portal be launched? Do we have a date?
Yes, and through you, Mr. Chair, my understanding, and perhaps Mr. Walker would correct me if I'm wrong, is that we would be set up for the end of July.
Okay.
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Jeff. That's going to be a real success, I think, too. And I want to commend everyone for the work done on that, to electronically and submitting it, and the clarity brought there. I'm still, Kyle, could you point us councillors to the part of the, I have a potential amendment for later, but I can't seem to, I don't have a very good computer set up right now, to the part about the terminology related to detached homes and how we might change that to residents, or what was the terminology that we've been grappling with there? Can you fill us in?
I can, but I'm going to pass this over to our CDO, Ms. Kapener Hunt, and she would be able to more properly explain the definitions.
Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Roosterhoff, the wording in 7.2 of the bylaw speaks to single detached dwelling units only that can have multiple families. And I think what the concerns were raised from the stakeholders was that if they have a family of 6, they can't rent that because it's not a single detached, if it's a semi or a town or a different type of built form. So the request was to remove the single detached and just leave it as a dwelling unit, which the STR would be a dwelling unit. And then the restriction would only fall onto when we rent by the room for the number of persons.
Okay, and so that should be something that we could be able to do when we look at the recommendation, right? We're gonna do that. So we'll point to 7.2 for the change later on. Thank you. That's helpful. And the other question I had was, bear with me, related to, yeah, and I think that we'll talk about it fulsomely, Mr. Chair, related to the one unit. You know, I'd like to maybe leave it for later, that we could have a fulsome discussion on that as a committee, and so I'll delay my questions on that specifically for when we have an opportunity to speak to it together.
Thank you. Councillor Chappelle, I believe I saw your hand.
Thank you, Chair. I have to also share the same accolades as Councillor Roosterhoff. I really do appreciate the outreach that took place with the STR community, and commend you, Kyle, for doing for the excellent work that you've done. There was a question raised by the members that were presented tonight about the aspect of basically a small business enterprise. of permitting more than one STR by ownership. And I'm wondering if it is possible to explain why it's limited to the one, and what is the hesitation to have more than one property. And I ask that question only because I think having the STR host within your own residence would be sort of something that'd almost be encouraged, because then Kingston residents can be ambassadors to the community, to residents visiting. And then having a secondary property would be the one that would generate their income. And if they were residents of Kingston, paying taxes, living in Kingston, supporting sports teams, etc., I don't have an issue. It doesn't bother me to want to pick winners, or I don't want to pick winners or losers. And if they were able to have that third property, I'd be okay with that. What I'm not okay with is if we had a multinational company come in and buy a large building or a historical building that has multiple units in it and turn it into a commercial enterprise. I'm not okay with that. So I'm just wondering, is there a reprieve, or is there a halfway mark that we can consider? I know we have some I know my question's getting a little wordy. I just needed to frame it the right way, and I apologize it wasn't better framed. But we didn't have a lot of uptake for people self-registering. And so it's almost too premature to get that full assessment to know if there is multiple STR owners that own multiple suites or multiple units. And I think we might be really limiting ourselves if we impose that feature of limiting one-to-one too soon. And that is my concern. And I'm wondering if a longer period before changing section 5.2 would be more appropriate. And if you can give me your insight on that, that'd be very helpful.
Yeah, thank you. And through your chair, I can try to answer as best as possible. I might direct to Commissioner Agnew, but if the committee would recall, we did have previous reports that had initially individuals could only operate under their primary residence. And that was a large debate in discussion through previous council meetings, where we initially went, we compared with other municipalities where their bylaws were written to only allow for their principal residency. Through the discussions that we had in council, that direction from council turned into that you were allowed to own one unit opposed to your primary residence. And that was largely to do with protecting the long-term stock and the long-term vacancy of our rentals. At the time that we initially proposed our reports, mind you, there was documentation that supplied us with over 600 rentals within the city of Kingston. And at that time, we were concerned that this could grow into a much larger situation with the short-term rental market. In that way, we weren't able to, come with a decisive decision that we could allow a certain number of STRs opposed to the offset of just your one from your principal residency. Commissioner Agnew, you can maybe jump in if there was anything further to that.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Just to add to Mr. Campos' comments, I think he's captured sort of the history of how where we started and where we arrived at where we are now, which was the removal of the principal residence requirement and then allowing the one unit. I think a lot of that was built again around the concerns that we had at the time and continue to be challenged by in the community with respect to our low vacancy rate and the availability of housing for the long-term market. So certainly, could council or could the committee consider additional ability for operators to have more than one STR? And that, of course, that's within your purview to be able to do so. It's something that we would just have to monitor from just from an impact perspective on the number that could increase to be over time. As Mr. Campo indicated, at one time we were looking at, we're like 600 operating in the market to now where we are, at like a third of that. We do expect there to be some increases with time as pandemic recovery continues and people start moving around more and seeking maybe more local tourism than what we've seen in the last couple of years. But it's really about monitoring that relative to ensuring that we have sufficient long-term housing supply to meet the needs of the community while balancing that with our desires to be a first-class tourism city as well. I don't know if that's helpful, or Councillor, but happy to take more questions.
Sure. No, that I appreciate your framing of that. So when Harari was looking at this, they were looking at 600, as Mr. Compo had stated, and now we're estimating on current trends is approximately 200, of which we have half of them, or more than half, that are interested in registering with the city, because gratefully in the city of Kingston, we have so many residents that are passionate about our community that they will participate. It just takes time to nudge them along a little bit. So in your opinion, then, what is the appropriate number of STR units for the city of Kingston?
Thank you. In terms to a question to me, I mean, it's difficult. I don't have an exact number in my mind. That where I still remain concerned is that our vacancy rate is down to about 1.4%. Now that's looking at multi-residential and what's available. The secondary market is measured separate of that. So I don't know if we could say it should only be 500. We have over 14,000 rental units in the in the community that we know of. There's certainly a number that we don't, that maybe were created without building permits. So, relative to that large number, I don't know if we could come up with a numerical number, but it's just watching it relative to our community vacancy rate. Certainly at 1.4, we've been as low as 0.6, and that made us the lowest in the province at that time. Certainly, I don't think we want to go down there again, because it's definitely not going to help with the housing issues we're having. And certainly that's also linked to housing affordability from a supply and demand perspective. But all we could continue to do, Councillor, if you want to consider that, is just monitor it and report back next year and let you know where we are, and to look at the connection with the housing market and make suggestions based on that. I think our concern is, to what you've said is certainly there is this, I believe the term that we used back then, and it was in some of the discourse around this, was dark streets, to sense of what you're talking about, people coming in, buying lots of properties that, aren't in the city, aren't going to be providing, good oversight of the STR, and essentially having, where some other communities have seen full neighborhoods where there's no permanent people living in the dwellings. They're just all being used for short-term rentals, and the impact that has had on neighborhoods, and hearing some of the concerns from our own community members about that being a potential eventuality for Kingston if we weren't careful in how we monitored the situation and how we licensed the situation. So I think it's a balance, Councillor. Our recommendation was to stay at 1, but again, similar to what we did this year, we can make changes, monitor over the year, and report back to the committee next year, and to see where we are, and continue to have an evolving approach to how we deal with this as the market changes, and certainly we get a little bit more experience with the licensing end, because we're only 12 months into it, so we're still definitely in a learning curve.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee? Councillor Doherty.
Thanks for your presentation, Kyle. That was really good. And all the answers to you and Paige. So just want to go back to some of the comments made earlier by people who are part of the committee. One was about loopholes, so that different members of the family could just register, and therefore the limitation of 1 per person could actually be skirted around quite easily. So I just wonder about that one. And then also the suggestion that maybe in some areas, like perhaps downtown, owners could have the numbers per registered owner could perhaps vary. Like maybe they could have 2 in areas where there's a higher demand. But I'm very cognizant of what you just said, Paige, about our low vacancy rate. So we do definitely want to keep that in mind.
Thank you. And through your chair, I can answer part of that. Paige, if you wanted to jump in after, by all means you can. in terms of the loophole, what the delegation is suggesting is that it is possible for an individual to go be registered as either a corporation or get an Ontario business license, which would then under law be a separate owner. It'd be a separate operator. So if somebody was wanting to go get multiple business licenses or register themselves as an Ontario corporation under multiple circumstances, it could potentially turn into that operator having more than one license.
And what Seattle or some other cities is doing to prevent that from happening? Is there anything around it? Like it has to be directors, can't be the same directors or something like that, or?
Yeah, I might refer to Mr. Reason to get some clarity. I do know that based on our comparisons with other municipalities, they stick to their primary residence. So this is somewhat unique, but I can let Mr. Reason speak to it.
Yes, thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for that question, Councillor. So, I mean, certainly in terms of the broad authority that's granted to the city pursuant to subsection 10.2 of the Municipal Act and the licensing power granted through subsection 151(1) of the Municipal Act, the city has the authority to to establish a regulatory regime that attempts to look behind the corporate veil and limit licenses, the number of licenses to the person who might be the directing mind behind numerous corporations. I think the challenges are more logistical. I think if the city wanted to pursue that, it would have to have some carefully drafted language in the bylaw. And then the second challenge would be on the enforcement, and it would require some significant resources to actually look behind those corporate veils, to try to determine who the directing mind of a corporation actually is and be able to establish that. And then, I imagine the city would have to maintain some kind of register that listed all the directors behind the corporations that held licenses, and would have to be able to cross-reference those. So I'm not saying it's impossible to come up with an effective regulatory regime that accomplished that, but just that there would be some challenges, certainly. So I hope that answers the question.
Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee? Oh, Mr. Clerk, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair, before we move on and leave from the briefing, there are a couple members of the public present, and so we just want to make sure that they have the opportunity as well to speak.
Thank you. Are there any more questions from the committee? Seeing none, we'll move to the public. Can we have the first member of the public present their name and their question?
So the two people in the gallery, if you wish to speak on this item, please raise your virtual hand in Zoom. It's located on the lower bottom of your screen there. And not seeing anything, Mr. Chair. Oh, Krista Leclaire.
Okay, Krista Leclaire, you have the floor.
Can you hear me? Okay, sorry about that. I think we double muted at the same time. Hi, folks. Thank you so much, councillors, for having me here today. I just, I've been so pleased to hear the comments to date. I know we've connected before, but I'm Krista Leclaire, the Executive Director for Kingston Accommodation Partners. And I just wanted to say, thanks to the working group, all of the folks that came out to participate, and of course to my colleagues at Tourism Kingston and those at the City of Kingston. I really do think it was a good process for all of us to go through. And, we just wanted to show our support for the recommendation in front of you today, and happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And is there a second delegation?
There is one other member of the public present, but they have not put up their hand, so I think we're good.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so now we shall put it on the floor, the short-term rental, that the administrative policies recommend to council that staff implement an in-house licensing program which incorporates the collection of municipal accommodation tax through a payment portal outlined in report AP 22-012, and that bylaw number 2021-10, a bylaw to license and regulate short-term rentals in the city of Kingston, be amended as per Exhibit B, draft bylaw to amend bylaw number 2021-10 to report AP 22-012. May I have a mover, please? Really? Nobody wants to move this? Thank you, Councillor Doherty. Anybody want to second this? Was that a hand, Ms. Councillor Holland? Thank you. It is now on the floor for questions, comments, amendments, or deferrals, or anything of that sort. Does anyone wish to make any comments? Councillor Roosterhoff, please begin. You are still on mute, Councillor Roosterhoff.
There, is that better now? Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm very limited in what I can do here tonight. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I want to go back to 7.2 and ask for an amendment to this bylaw, referring to so that we can change from single detached to the reference to dwelling unit. If we could look at that and make that change tonight as an amendment.
Do you have the amendment in writing for the clerk?
I don't have it in writing, Mr. Chair. I thought that because it was, if we could refer to it on the screen, I thought that since it was just one or two words, that we could go to it if the clerk could help me with that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, all amendments must be made in writing.
Well,
in that kind of sense.
Then can we have a time, and I will have to send it to you right away.
Certainly, Councillor Roosterhoff, if you could do that right now, that would be great. In the meantime, I will ask if there's any while you're doing that, I will ask if there's anybody else on the committee who would like to speak to this, and we will come back to you when you're ready. Is that okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other councillors who would like to make comments, questions, or propose amendments? Councillor Chappell, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just reflecting back at how much money that was spent on Harari and how little uptake that we've had. And it just seems that I'm wondering if we had actually, in conversation with all the STR hosts and their consultation, the majority of the hosts had used Airbnb as their tool. If we had actually, I'm wondering at what point was the city excluded from the opportunity for Airbnb to not collect the MAT tax on the city's behalf? What was the time frame where we hit that threshold where we're told we're out of luck? I'd like to understand that, because that would have been a very efficient way rather than $90,000 for 6,000 hours of staff time.
Mr. Campo, go ahead.
Thank you, and through you. Again, Councillor Chappell, there was initially 600 short-term rentals when we were doing our analysis. And at that time, our understanding was that this was something that was too much of a volume concept in terms of staff in an in-house process, being able to go through this and accommodate the municipal accommodation tax effectively. When we had reached out to Hamari and we had everything settled, we started the implementation on June 1st. After such, there was multiple factors with COVID happening, the restrictions put on short-term rentals, the short-term rental market going into the medium-term rentals. Some people just ended up not doing short-term rentals, period. And whether it's one variable or the other, we've seen a significant reduction in the amount of short-term rentals after we were able to provide our information to Hermari, and once we were able to get that information back. Throughout the process, we realized and we continue to work as staff towards an in-house licensing process and seeing ways that we could effectively improve this process throughout this first year. It was initially around December, February that we, December and January months where we, as staff, started to see more efficiencies and ways that we could bring this process in-house. But we knew at that time that it was either an in-house process based on council's direction, and this was something that we felt comfortable that we could take in-house. At that time, we brought the report in January to February, I believe it was in February, to cut off Hermari, and that was around the exact same time we had reached out to Airbnb to ask if they could still consider Kingston to collect the municipal accommodation tax, and that we could not get them to commit to Kingston to do that collection, as they were entering agreements with multiple municipalities across the province, and then it was too much of a workload volume for themselves as well.
So what will happen if, just because of the technical advantage that they have, the system is quite interesting. And if they end up getting a province-wide initiative to collect the VAT tax on behalf of municipalities, what would happen to the in-house collection system? Would that be abandoned, or will we adopt or do you envision adopting Airbnb as the, I guess, the mechanism to collect the VAT tax?
I'll defer to Commissioner Agnew or Mr. Walker if they would like to answer.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Walker, you can always add to anything I have to say. I mean, definitely, Councillor, if there is an initiative that is successful provincially in having Airbnb collect on behalf of all municipalities, I mean, certainly from our perspective, I know it's something that community members and certainly hosts and certainly some members of council will have been in favor of. And we did pursue that quite strongly in our initial work and pulling together this bylaw for the sake of ease and sake of experience of the operators themselves. We just could never get them to commit to working with our community. It was, make a request formally and then we'll see. And then this time around, they're actually quite a bit more definitive. And we've, of course, included some of that correspondence in the report that's before you tonight. If that came around again, I mean, I think it's something that we would just bring back to the committee to look at the pros and cons of both and what it offered versus our own in-house system and any efficiencies or capacity it may free up by not having staff facilitated. And we would bring that back to you as a committee for consultation and certainly talk to hosts about it as well. So, we're not dead set on never considering anything to do with Airbnb. It's from the staff perspective, we're always managing the risk of that we couldn't get a commitment from them. And so if that changes, we'll certainly come back to you with more information. Mr. Walker, I don't know if you have anything additional to add to that.
Yeah, additionally, I would just add, first of all, I agree with everything that you said there. And secondly, that if we were to be successful in having Airbnb collecting, the online portal would just simply run in tandem with it for anybody that is operating that is not part of the Airbnb process or another booking operation that may be included with the provincial on-take of an Airbnb solution.
Okay, I just trying to be forward thinking if something did change, because I do think this for smaller municipalities, like Kingston is rather large, but if you look at smaller municipalities, I know Muskokas and various places, they have similar issues. And so I do think there's a lot of undercurrent pressure for municipalities to be able to have this access and partner with Airbnb. So I think at some point we may see that. And that's why I thought it was good to have that conversation. So thank you for being so open to looking at potential issues that might arise in the future. I guess although I'm raising the question now, I'm not fully comfortable. I didn't really get my answer because my internet dropped me, and I apologize. So I'm going to be repetitive. If 5.2 is going to limit, I just want clarity on what 5.2 does, the proposed amendment, because I'm really supportive of a person to have an Airbnb in their primary residence and then have a secondary unit or home that they can rent out. I think that is quite possible. Maybe not to go to the 3 as proposed, but a compromise of 2 I think would be appropriate. But and that really limits anybody that comes in with a corporate attitude to buy multiple properties. So I'd like to get clarity on 5.2, what the proposal is going to be, because if some new entrants want to enter the market and have 2 properties, their own personal residence plus the secondary one, I'd like them to have that option. I don't want to be picking winners and losers. So please explain what 5.2 effectively does in the revised proposal.
Through your chair. So I wasn't sure if Commissioner Agnew was going to jump in or not. So in terms of the proposal, I can begin. If any of my colleagues wanted to jump in, they can. This would, the operator would not be allowed to have or operate more than 1 short-term rental at any time. So 1 operator, 1 license. Obviously, that's subject to if council wanted to provide a different direction for staff, but it would limit to having one short-term rental per operator. Also, I can pass it to Commissioner Agnew or CBO keeping her hand.
Yeah, just to clarify on top of that, Councillor Chappelle, I think the other part is that the owner of the property and how the property is registered on the deed to the title of the owner, whoever's name is on the title of that property, they're entitled to have 1 license. So that's the way that we're suggesting that it be going forward. So in the circumstance you're talking about where perhaps an owner is operating something out of their home, so they're almost doing like a home sharing, but then they have an additional property that is separate of that residence and something maybe they commercially own. They couldn't, the way it's written now, they couldn't have a license for that second one if the properties are registered to them as individuals, so that you would have, 2 properties, same name on the deed. They would have to be registered separately to different people, the way the bylaw is written now, to be able to have that second STR.
What if it was a spouse and they had their maternal home, their matrimonial home, they're shared, and then the wife has her own Airbnb? Because she's on 2 different property listings, would that be precluded as well? So I'm trying to avoid the problems or understand what potential problems can happen. So if my wife and I decided to rent out a bedroom, and then I decided to buy a second house, not that I could afford one in Kingston anymore, but if I did buy one and I chose to make that an Airbnb, would that be permitted? Because I now am on 2 deeds within the city of Kingston.
I think, actually, I'm not going to answer that question because I'm not a lawyer and I don't want to, so maybe Mr. Reason should answer it. I know what I want to say, but I also don't want to say the wrong thing. So it is a very important point of clarification, Councillor. So I'll let Mr. Reason speak to that from a legal perspective, because that's really what you're asking about.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Agnew. And thank you, Councillor, for the question, and through you, Mr. Chair. So in this hypothetical, without knowing any of the other circumstances, I can say generally, a husband as a natural person and a wife as a natural person are, legally speaking, 2 distinct separate persons. So the way that bylaw is currently drafted, each of them as a person could hold a license under the bylaw, provided they met all the other requirements in the bylaw to hold a license, if that makes sense.
my question, Mr. Reason, was that as a husband and wife couple or two partners in common law, we share the same residence, we share the same matrimonial home, and we both are on that particular line of title. I choose to get involved and have a separate Airbnb property because my name is on that one title of my matrimonial home and now on a second title of a separate property. Am I permitted to have that Airbnb property because I'm already effectively have one? That's the question I'm trying to understand. And if that is the implication that I'm not permitted to have that secondary property to help finance my endeavor I would think that I'll have to put forward a motion, an amendment to 5.2 to allow people to own two properties as individual existence of beings, human beings.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. And through you again, Mr. Chair. So the restriction in section 5.2 is a restriction not based on property ownership, but based on being a person holding already a license. So that's the restriction. So if a husband held a license already under the bylaw, then that husband would be prohibited from holding a second license under the bylaw. And I mean, the same would apply to a wife or a spouse, partner, any other member of that family. So as long as a person doesn't hold any other licenses under the bylaw and meets all the other requirements of the bylaw, such as being the registered owner of a property, then they would be permitted to hold a license under the bylaw. Does that answer your question?
Well, it's getting clear as mud because usually a husband or spouse, a couple of family, they'll go into business, they'll be together in that business, usually a joint matrimonial relationship. So what you're telling me, let me get this completely clear. And I apologize for trying to really get clarity on this, but I think it's incredibly important. So I'm going to use Mr. Khan, for example. I'm not sure if he's married or not, but if that business is registered in his name only, and he wants to purchase a second property, as long as his wife purchases a second property and his wife, I'm assuming he's married, chooses to list the Airbnb, that joint family unit can then have two Airbnbs. Is that correct?
So, excuse me, Councillor, I just want to clarify and make sure I understand what you're asking me.
I'm trying to understand how I can access, like the way that bylaw is written is confusing to me, that it's one owner to one owner. But because when you go to the bank and you get ownership on a property and you need a mortgage, they force you into co-signing. It's very difficult to buy properties individually, okay? So if, say, Mr. Khan wants to have his second unit because he's enjoying the life of being an entrepreneur and a host for Kingston, if he wishes to buy that second property, if he's on that title, that property, co-ownership with his spouse, but it's only his spouse that takes out the Airbnb, to collectively as a family, can they have two STR units?
Okay, I think the chief building official, Ms. Capener Hunt, is suggesting that she might be able to answer that question more clearly than I am.
Thank you, Andrew. And through you, Mr. Chair, Councillor Chappell, so because of the way the bylaw is written, the operator is the owner is a person, a corporation, etc. So you could have, if one of the STRs was in your wife's name and one was in your name, then yes, you could feasibly have two short-term rentals under the bylaw. The current wording, what we're trying to accomplish with the change of the wording in 5.2 is the current wording not only allows you to have multiple properties, but it also allows an operator to have multiple units within the same building. So that's where we're seeing the challenges that are coming in from the applications, and that's what's holding up some of the process and taking additional time with staff and causing conflict with other regulations under the Building Code and Planning Act. So the wording that we've written is just to limit it to one short-term rental. And as Mr. Reason indicated earlier, it would be very challenging to look at corporations and trying to limit it that way. So this limit would just limit that to one per building, but it doesn't mean that if you and your spouse each wanted one that you couldn't do that.
So, okay, now I have another question. So
that's you're already past 5 minutes. We're going to do a second round. If I could ask you just to hold off for a little while, we will come back to you.
Certainly. Yeah.
Is there any other counselor? I believe Councillor Holland, you're the only one who hasn't spoken yet at this round. No? Okay, so now we'll start a second round. Okay, Councillor Doherty, go ahead.
It's not really a question, it's just want to say to Councillor Chappelle, that's what I was getting at too when I was asking about that loophole that was mentioned earlier by one of the presenters, and the answer that I received is that, well, people could have different corporations and have different ownerships, but they're the same directors. So it is very difficult it's not impossible, but it's very onerous. And I think probably not financially viable either for us. I think we were collected $5,000. So I think the system has to be pretty straightforward for staff time as well too. No question. Sorry. Do you want
no worries. This is
frame that into a
as well.
question?
Thank you. Councillor Roosterhoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Apologize for the technical difficulties. I do believe the amendment for 7.2 has been prepared. Is that okay to present that?
Yes, if you wish to move it, go right ahead.
Yes, I would like to move the amendment that the clerk will put forward. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to try to see this. I can't. Okay.
I can read it for you.
Yeah, I just see it now. You go ahead and read it, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Moved by Councillor Roosterhoff. We're looking for a seconder. I'll read it and then I'll ask for a seconder. That the recommendation in report number AP 22-102 be amended to add a recommendation that bylaw number 2021-10, a bylaw to license and regulate short-term rentals in the city of Kingston, be further amended to delete section 7.2 and replace it with the following. Section 7.1 of this bylaw does not apply to short-term rentals that consist of an entire dwelling unit rented under a single booking. That's the proposed. And now, can I have a seconder? Councillor Chappelle seconds. Discussion. Councillor Osterhoff, please feel free to.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. It might be reading a little bit complicated there, but I will ask Ms. Kappener-Hunt if she could comment if that's the right wording. It's kind of reads that way in order to apply what we actually want for terminology. So if I could ask Ms. Kappener-Hunt to confirm that that's an acceptable term. How it's written is kind of legalese to me. I don't quite see it, but.
And just before you do, Ms. Carpenter-Hunt, Councillor Osterhoff, could you explain what your intent is?
The intent clearly was so that the reference to single detached would be changed to dwelling unit.
For the purpose of allowing more than one rental unit, or so that we can have...
So as Ms. Kappener-Hunt talked about, where there might be a large family or something like that, might limit it, and it come under different terms of what type of home it was. This would still allow it to be a dwelling unit. Allows a wider interpretation. Is that correct, Ms. Kappener-Hunt?
Ms. Kappener-Hunt, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, that is correct, Councillor Roosterhoff. So we're just striking out single detached from that 7.2 clause.
Thank you. That's my intention. And I know it's a lot more words sort of, but I accept that that's what the result will be.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Councillor Roosterhoff or comments on the amendment as presented? Seeing none, go ahead. Councillor Chappelle.
Yeah, yes, I'd just like to comment that this would permit a family like Councillor Bohm's family to come and use STR in the city of Kingston. And I certainly think we want to support strong family units.
Thank you. Anyone else? No. In that case, let's call the question. All those in favor, raise your hands, please. Thank you. That passes unanimously. Continuing on in this round, does anybody else want to comment or further amend the recommendation, the amended recommendation already? Councillor Chappelle.
I just want to compliment staff for clarifying the points for me on 5.2. I'm not going to put forward an amendment at this time. I understand their intent. And if there's a family unit that wishes to have two STRs, there is a way to do that as individual bodies. And so I'm satisfied with that. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, we'll call the question on the motion on the recommendation as amended. All those in favor? And that passes unanimously. Thank you. So next is motions, notices. I don't see any motions, so notices of motions, none. Other business. Does anyone have anything they wish to comment on? Seeing none. Correspondence, date of next meeting will be Wednesday, July 6th at 6 p.m. And the last duty we have to perform is an adjournment. May I have a motion to adjourn? Nobody wants. Thank you. Councillor Doherty, a seconder. Councillor Roosterhoff, all in favor? And we are adjourned. Thank you all. Have a good day or good evening.